I ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recesses during today's hearing without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions without objection, so ordered. I want to welcome our witnesses in particular, but all of you to today's hearing as we are fast galloping toward the need to reauthorize the FAST Act. And our cities and localities are looking to us to see what we're going to do. I met this morning with a group here in the Congress. The focus generally has been on revenue, and why not? Especially since that has been the most difficult part of we've had to do. But the issues haven't waited for Congress to catch up on revenue, and people are asking and indeed using other methods to get rid of congestion and to bring us into the 21st century on transportation. In today's hearing, we're going to look at some of those questions. The nuances of federal tolling policy, of congestion pricing, of technology solutions to address congestion and many other transportation needs today. So while Congress fiddled and failed to solve the revenue question, congestion has negatively attacked or affected our constituents as never before. Not to mention the quality of air we breathe and the failure to deal with climate change, which was not even discussed at the time of the last reauthorization, to indicate just how far time has moved and how much Congress has to catch up. The Urban Mobility Report indicates, and you might want to look at what it says for your constituents, that my constituents pay $1,840 a year in congestion costs. And we here in the National Capital Region are the third highest in the region. I hope yours on $1,840 per year per constituent. That's what my constituents pay. So this is nothing short of a congestion tax. And in our case here in this region, it is a result of 248 million, that's million hours of congestion delays in 2017 across the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. I invite you all to look at what this means, what the mobility report says for your own area. Our Harvard School public health study found that 83% of the nation's largest urban areas contribute more than 2,200 premature deaths annually. That's an $18 billion cost to the healthcare system. When it says largest urban areas, that really means the entire area of a big city and its suburbs. While we debate how to resolve congestion, we have left the states and localities looking on their own and looking for more sources of revenue. Today's testimony will hear support for greater tolling flexibility, enabling states and localities to raise more revenue. But we will also hear from others that Congress should erect barriers to tolling. This difference that's going to come out in this hearing is deliberate. The division you will see on the panel is representative of a broader disagreement on tolling policy that Congress will have to debate. Congestion pricing has become mainstream. We have lanes springing up across many urban areas. We have variable rate cordon pricing, charging drivers to enter into a congestion area. You see what New York City has done. Closer to my own district here in the state of Virginia, we have variable tolls on all lanes on I-66 during rush hour. Now, I never thought I would see what has resulted. People are paying it with tolls as high as $47.50 for a single 10-mile trip. Excessive tolls raise significant equity questions, of course, particularly the impact on low-income drivers, and they are likely to divert traffic onto nearby roads and neighborhoods because people are not wanting to pay $42 plus to get to anywhere. So we can't gloss over those impacts as we look at these new strategies. I am particularly interested in technology and how it can help resolve congestion. Autonomous vehicles, for example, can they reduce congestion or do they increase congestion when anybody can hop into a car and go any place she wants to on her own? We should be asking the same questions for transportation networks and connected vehicles. Finally, I think it's critical, and I do not intend to neglect the robust transit systems we need and the role transit plays in reducing congestion. I cannot imagine this area, this National Capital Region, without transit. The roads would simply be impossible. Dense urban areas rely on subway service, while rapid bus transit will also greatly reduce congestion, and not to mention hot lanes, which are becoming more and more popular. Some on today's panel suggest that toll revenues should only go to maintain the toll road. However, I remind you that investing in transit and other methods to reduce vehicle miles traveled is a highly effective tool to reduce congestion. I want to thank the witnesses for joining today, and I want to ask the chairman of our full committee, Mr. DeFazio, oh, excuse me, I should ask the ranking member. Well, how could I possibly not move to my left? My good friend, Mr. Davis, for his comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, in honor, especially if we get some policies, if we move forward, I would always yield to the chairman first, if that helps us.
I want you to wake everybody up.
You want me to wake everybody up? All right, I can do that.
Which means I put them to sleep.
Clearly, Madam Chair, that was not me who alluded to that. That was the chairman. Hey, in all seriousness, thank you. This is a great committee. I really enjoy serving with Chairwoman Norton, and this committee has a history of bipartisanship. We're looking for solutions, which is why you were all here today, is to help us find those solutions. I do want to thank the witnesses and recognize that this subcommittee is going to continue to do our work to reauthorize the federal surface transportation policies. And as part of this effort, as you know, you're all here. We've held a number of hearings, too, outside of this one, on very important policy topics, and I want to thank the chair for allowing us to participate in these types of gatherings, because it truly does help us come up with solutions. Today, as we know, the subcommittee will focus on tools being utilized by state and local communities to mitigate congestion. Congestion can be caused by various issues, such as weather, traffic incidents, and, as many of you had in your testimony, capacity constraints. According to the 2019 Urban Mobility Report, Americans traveled an extra 8.8 billion hours due to congestion and purchased an extra 3.3 billion gallons of fuel, leading to a total congestion cost of $166 billion in 2017. Dr. Lomax, who worked on this report, is with us today, and I look forward to learning more about its findings in his testimony and follow-up questions. As we know, congestion negatively impacts our ability to move products to domestic and international markets, which undermines our economy and America's global competitiveness. And congestion is not just an urban issue. Although I can tell you in my district in central and southwestern Illinois, my constituents' idea of congestion is much different than the idea of congestion out here in Washington, D.C., or in other larger urban areas. But it's perhaps most importantly, though, congestion, again, no matter where you are, in my district or here, it's a personal issue. Sitting in traffic means that there is less time to do the things that are most important to each of us. I can remember sitting in traffic. It made me late to football practices that I was coaching my kids' football games, or coaching my kids' football teams, or getting to a basketball game late to watch my daughter cheer when she was in high school. So these are things that are very personal to us. This hearing is going to specifically focus on how states and local communities are utilizing some of the tools in the toolbox: tolling, congestion pricing strategies, and new technologies to address congestion. Our witnesses will provide us with real-world examples of how these tools are all being deployed, as well as give us their perspective on whether or not these tools are working well. There are other tools to address congestion beyond those that are the focus of today's hearing. If we're going to tackle congestion, we need a thoughtful approach that provides state and local communities with the flexibility to do what makes sense given their unique circumstances, because no single solution is going to work here in Washington, D.C., and at the same time, work in the 13th Congressional District of Illinois, where I'm blessed to serve. I look forward to our discussion on this important issue and learning more about how the federal government can be a good partner to states and local communities as they seek to address congestion. And with that, again, thank you to our witnesses. Thank you to Chairwoman Norton, and thank you to Chairman DeFazio for being here at this important hearing today, and I yield back.
Appreciate your remarks, Mr. Davis. Now, it is your turn. Chairman of our full committee, Mr. DeFazio.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You both made points that are, Congress needs to pay attention to. I mean, the costs of congestion on an annual basis are about 4 times our federal investment in surface transportation and transit. I just think about that. We're wasting 4 times as much money as we're investing on an annual basis year after year after year. But around here, we're paralyzed. My God, we can't figure out how we're going to pay for this. How are you ever going to pay for this? Well, let's see, we haven't adjusted the gas and diesel tax since 1993. I've proposed something that's so de minimis that it's just embarrassing that we can't do it. Let's just index the gas and diesel tax and do some bonding and limit the annual increase to 1.5 cents a gallon a year. And I keep saying, I think you're going to lose your election if gas goes up 1.5 cents a gallon. When you drove to work today, you drove by the gas station, it probably went up a nickel or down a nickel on the digital sign. No one's going to notice that, and people around the country have showed that they're willing to pay to get out of congestion. But Congress hasn't got the message. The White House hasn't got the message. They love to talk about, big infrastructure bill. We were up to $2 trillion for 3 weeks, and then we were down to 0. In fact, the proposals in the president's budget consistently cut transportation investment. So, the states can't do it on their own. They're trying. The states are trying. A lot of all red states have raised their gas tax, raised their registration fees, and states that have mixed governments and blue states. It's not a partisan issue out there in America. It just seems to be a partisan issue here in Washington, D.C. And, we're at the point of, total paralysis. I'm not going to repeat the statistics on how much time people waste and the hours. The amount of fuel wasted sitting around, about 4 billion gallons a year, wasted fuel, adding to the problems with climate change, which some of us believe in. So, it's time to act. Now, we're going to hear some things today that, that you're going to say, well, congestion pricing. Congestion pricing with what kind of alternatives for people? You can't just price people off the roads and say, hey, we solved congestion. That person doesn't set their schedule to go to work, most likely, and they don't have a lot of options. Unless you build sufficient options, you can't just price people off the road. And when Eleanor talked about $47 for 10 miles, $4.70 a mile. Hell, that's not even a Lexus lane. That's a chauffeured limousine lane. You know, I mean, who can afford that? In my own state, you know, we have freeways. We don't have tolls. Now the mayor and some in the legislature, Portland, have decided, well, maybe we ought to just toll parts of our freeways to deal with some problems. You know, but of course, it isn't even going to be like the hot lane. No one's going to have an option. You're going to either use it or not use it. What about diversion? What about people who have to go from east side of Portland to the west side of Portland to Intel to go to work? Oh, sorry, it's going to take you 2 hours because or it's going to cost you a bunch of money that you can't afford. So we need a comprehensive approach, which is more federal investment. And then we need to start applying technology, smart technology, 21st century technology. I don't know, you know, you sit at traffic lights. No one's coming. I was in Pittsburgh. They have smart traffic lights, real time. Imagine that. 21st century technology. And we're still working with 19th century technology with metered traffic lights that are set by traffic engineers who go out and do traffic counts and stand around on the corner and then set them according to what they think traffic flows are going to be in the future, which has nothing to do with reality. So, you know, I'm losing patience with what's going on right here. The Senate passed a bill. It's got some decent policy in it. It's got a little more spending. But the leaders of the Senate have said, oh, it's impossible to pay for. We don't have where to pay for that. We can't pay for that. No way to pay for it. Well, if we don't pay for it, we're going to waste a hell of a lot more money every year in, year out, day out, and Americans are going to get more and more frustrated. So I hope today's hearing provides some ideas that will help mitigate these problems. But the bottom line is we got to pony up some money or we're not going to solve any problems. Thank you.
I share the chairman's frustration. We passed the FAST Act with no new money. And we just can't do what we did last time. So in order to get new money, we had to make a 6-year bill, a 5-year bill. Who are we fooling? And I appreciate that the chairman raised the issue of the gas tax. How come in red states they're not afraid to raise the gas tax, but they send people to Congress who are? And so we're stuck on stupid when it comes to revenue and are overwhelmed by what needs to be done in our system. I am pleased that the Senate, controlled by the other side, is looking at new revenue. I want to welcome our witnesses. The Honorable Oliver Gilbert III, who's the mayor of the city of Miami Gardens and chairman of the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization. Travis Brower, the assistant director of public affairs for the Oregon Department of Transportation. Tilly Chang, the executive director of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority on behalf of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Darren D. Hawkins, President and Chief Executive Officer of YRC Worldwide, Inc., on behalf of the American Trucking Association. Timothy J. Lomax, Regents Fellow at Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and Mark Scribner, Senior Fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I look forward to your testimony. Before we hear from the panel, I would like to recognize Ms. Wilson to introduce Mayor Gilbert, a constituent from her district.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Norman. I'm honored to introduce my personal mayor, the mayor of the great city of Miami Gardens, which will host the 2020 Super Bowl, and chair of the Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization, TPO, Mayor Oliver Gilbert. When I learned that this subcommittee was having a hearing on congestion and tolling, Mayor Gilbert was the first witness that I knew I had to recommend. He is a young lawyer with a long and distinguished career in public service that began as an aide in the Florida legislature. He was regarded as an astute staffer both legislatively and politically. Within a decade, he became the mayor of the city of Miami Gardens. As mayor, he has launched several successful initiatives to increase access to public transportation and improve mobility. One such initiative is the Miami Gardens Express, a free trolley service that many, many residents depend on. His accomplishments as mayor and leadership on transportation issues compelled his Miami-Dade TPO colleagues to elect him as their chair in January 2019. As TPO chair, Mayor Gilbert oversees the implementation of the county's strategic Miami Area Rapid Transportation SMART Plan, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure investment program to reduce congestion and spur economic growth. Mayor Gilbert, welcome to Congress, and thank you for testifying today and for your leadership on transportation issues that greatly concern Floridians and others throughout this nation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Wilson. I'd like to now recognize Congresswoman Davids to introduce Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member. I'd like to take the opportunity of introducing Mr. Darren D. Hawkins, President and Chief Executive Officer of YRC Worldwide, Inc., on behalf of the American Trucking Associations. YRC Worldwide is a freight holding company based in the Kansas 3rd Congressional District in Overland Park, Kansas. They employ 24,000 drivers and dock workers who are members of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Their trucks travel more than 900 million miles annually in the United States, and more than 1,700 YRCW drivers have more than 1 million consecutive accident-free miles. That's something a lot of us should be celebrating. YRCW has a long history and has long been important in the Kansas City metropolitan area business community and the civic community. And we're proud to be very well represented in hearing your testimony today, Mr. Hawkins, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here. It's a pleasure to have you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Davids. Without objection, our witness's full statement will be entered into the record. Since your written testimony will be made a part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mayor Gilbert, I ask you to proceed now, sir.
Thank you. I'd be remiss if I didn't start by saying 18 years ago this country was attacked. I stand in awe of you all's service and the men and women of our military, what they do for us around the world to ensure that we can be here in this room having this discussion is important. I thank them and I thank you all. Good morning, Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chair DeFazio, and members of this distinguished subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd also like to thank my Congresswoman, Frederica Wilson, for her service to our district. Today, I stand as her mayor and resident in awe of her service and the example she sets for our community. I'm Oliver Gilbert, as stated before, the chair of the Miami-Dade County Transportation Planning Organization, and I'm also the proud mayor of Miami Gardens, and also the proud mayor of the Miami Dolphins. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I'm long-suffering. It's a thing. I'm here to tell you today that roads, they aren't just asphalt. They're pathways to something greater. Rail is not just something that carries trains. Rail specifically, the Metro Rail in Miami-Dade County, carried a young boy from Miami Gardens to the University of Miami Law School every day. It helped him get his law degree. Ultimately, it was responsible for him being the mayor of his hometown, Miami Gardens. I stand before you today in large part because someone invested in meaningful and efficient public transportation. Today, I advocate that we pay their brilliance forward and find ways to expand rail, create dynamic transportation, reduce congestion, and promote conservation of time and of the planet. I'd like to now share how we are starting to address this in Miami-Dade County and how you can partner with us to make transportation an instrument of economic development and job creation. In Miami-Dade County, traffic is an impediment not just to our growth economically, but to our development as a community. Our expressway system has almost reached its limit, and we have no room to build our way out of congestion. This is why we're providing travel choices and alternatives that include both express lanes as well as expanding transit through the Miami-Dade SMART Plan, a rapid transit plan for our future. 95 Express has been in operation for 10 years, and it has reduced overall traffic congestion and increased traffic flow. While the Miami-Dade region has the 4th largest population, we're the 12th ranked area for congestion, partly due to the use of express lanes and BERT service. BERT service has been highly successful, with ridership rising 48% in the first 2 years it was implemented. We plan to expand this network as a part of the SMART Plan. Congress's support of the Value Pricing Pilot Program and the leadership of Congressman Webster, who was in the Florida Senate at the time, allowed us to pilot the 95 Express project forward and convert HOV lanes to HOT lanes. We improved our rankings on hours of driver delay from 10th to 12th, even as our population grew, which is actually quite remarkable. This is not to say that congestion isn't a problem. However, the express lanes and BERT improved the commute times for all lanes, including the non-tolled lanes, which is also significant. While express lanes help, the best long-term remedy for relieving congestion in South Florida is through the expansion of a rapid transit network. Our TPO has designated the SMART Plan as our top priority. The SMART Plan involves improvements to the BERT network and 6 rapid transit corridors. Right now, the South Corridor of the plan is in development and funding stage. Miami-Dade has committed $100 million. The state has committed $100 million. We're asking the FTA to commit $100 million. Locally, we have committed all available local funding, including TIPS, over the next 40 years to implement the projects, but it won't be enough. We need your help. Federal support of innovative projects like SMART is essential, and a federal process that offers certainty and helps move projects like SMART forward is a must. For example, the North Corridor. The expansion of the Metro Rail was initially contemplated when I was in elementary school, and still no rail has been built. Students in class right now at Scott Lake and Crestview and Norland and Parkway, they deserve better. We have to do better, and we have to do it faster. We need a federal funding process that acknowledges the need of a community to access opportunity within a reasonable time frame so all the partners can plan and do their part. There needs to be predefined funding structures for regions like Miami-Dade that provides for more than widening highways as a solution to congestion. With this, we can create a future that's substantially less congestion. With this, we can create a future so that a kid who went to FAMU can actually do some great things. I would end my comments with this, just the wisdom of Albert Einstein. You can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Our goal must not only be better answers, but also we have to ask tomorrow's questions. This will allow us to design and build a system that is flexible, expansive, and growable. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your support, and thank you for your leadership. Together, we can grow the system forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mayor Gilbert. We're going to now call on Travis Bauer, Assistant Director of Public Affairs for Oregon Department of Transportation.
Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Travis Brower. I'm the Assistant Director at the Oregon Department of Transportation, or ODOT. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I particularly want to thank Chairman DeFazio for his leadership on transportation issues and all he has done over 3 decades of service on this committee to make our nation's transportation stronger. It's interesting to be here talking about tolling because Oregon and ODOT, we don't operate any toll roads currently. But that could change in coming years as the clamor from the public for relief from the gridlock that is gripping the Portland metro area has led our legislators to direct ODOT to implement tolling. Data show that the Portland metro region's congestion is bad and getting worse due to rapid population and job growth. In just 2 years, from 2015 to 2017, hours of congestion increased by 13% across the region, and daily vehicle hours of delay increased by 20%. And that was on top of a similar increase in the previous 2 years. Many of our highways function more like parking lots at rush hour, and rush hour has now spread to become rush afternoon and evening, as 5 sections of state highway in the Portland metro region are congested at least 7 hours every day. Residents and businesses across the state increasingly are complaining to legislators and ODOT about how congestion in Portland poses a growing threat to our state's economy, making it more costly for companies across Oregon to get their goods to market. In response to these concerns about the threat to the economy and our quality of life, in 2017, the Oregon legislature passed the largest transportation investment package in the state's history, known as Keep Oregon Moving. This legislation included a comprehensive multimodal congestion relief strategy. The legislature funded new lanes on I-5, I-205, and other highways to alleviate bottlenecks. But they recognized that we can't build our way out of congestion. So they also invested in intelligent transportation systems that help make traffic flow more efficiently. And they provided significant investment in transportation options, particularly public transportation. This will allow TriMet, our major transit agency in the region, to launch its biggest service expansion ever. But the legislature recognized that even with all of these investments, they wouldn't be enough to achieve the congestion reduction the public demands. Even with this historic funding package, the legislature could not fund a number of high-priority congestion relief projects, including improvements to Interstate 205. That's why the legislature turned to tolling to address congestion and raise revenue for improvements. In Keep Oregon Moving, they directed the Oregon Transportation Commission, ODOT's governing body, to implement tolling on both I-5 and I-205, our main north-south corridors in the region that carry the bulk of our freight and face the worst congestion. Faced with this legislative mandate, the commission engaged regional stakeholders and created a public engagement process that reached members of the public more than 46,000 times. They created a stakeholder advisory committee made up of local government officials, the trucking industry, advocates for low-income communities, and others. The commission charged this group with developing a recommendation for where we could use tolling to reduce congestion and how to address the potential impacts. We analyzed options for tolling along the I-5 and I-205 corridors, including managed lanes, tolling all lanes, and tolling bridges. After detailed analysis, managed lanes like high-occupancy toll lanes and express toll lanes fell by the wayside. We simply didn't find any location where these would offer significant congestion relief. What the advisory committee ultimately recommended was 2 tolling options that could significantly reduce congestion. First, implement variable rate tolling on I-5 through the core of the Portland metro region. The American Trucking Research Institute recently ranked this the 28th worst truck bottleneck in the nation. Tolling would be implemented in conjunction with a congestion relief project that will add lanes at the interchange between I-5, I-84, and I-405. Tolling could help pay for this and other improvements. Second, toll on or near the Abernathy Bridge on Interstate 205. This section of I-205 is just 2 lanes in each direction, and we're designing a project to widen that section of highway. But neither the legislature nor ODOT has been able to find the $500 million needed to fund that project. Tolling offers a potential way to fund some or all of it. In addition to recommending where tolling could benefit the public, the committee also looked at some of the areas where we'll need to mitigate potential impacts of tolling. They asked the commission to find ways to avoid diversion of traffic onto local streets, to ensure that tolling doesn't cause significant issues for low-income families who may not be able to afford tolls, and to ensure that there's good transit service so that people have another option to get around. The commission is moving forward on these recommendations, and we're developing an in-depth public involvement process that will answer many of these questions. Ongoing public engagement is going to be critical because we know that in order to be successful, we need to address the public's concerns and show how tolling can improve their ability to get around efficiently. We are a member of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. AASHTO supports increased tolling flexibility to allow states to maximize revenue-raising opportunities in light of some of the federal funding challenges that Congressman DeFazio mentioned. Greater flexibility would allow states to work with communities to use tolling to help improve our transportation system across the nation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Brower. We'll hear next from Tilly Chang, Executive Director of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority, who is speaking on behalf of the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Welcome, Ms. Chang.
Good morning, Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chair DeFazio, and subcommittee members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide San Francisco's and ITS America's perspective on the topic of pricing and congestion management. My name is Tilly Chang. I serve as the Executive Director of the County Transportation Authority, and it is an honor to provide testimony on our local experience with these topics and why we believe pricing and incentives are promising strategies to help us reach our transportation goals. First, let me provide an overview of the problem. As in other places, rising population and employment, but also combined with the growth of ride-hail vehicles, are clogging our streets. In a typical year, commuters spend about 116 hours, almost 3 weeks, stuck in traffic. Muni buses, private cars alike, they crawl on city streets at about 5 to 10 miles per hour during the rush hour period. Congestion also affects public health in our core neighborhoods. These are areas seeing record numbers of severe and fatal crashes, which our Vision Zero policy seeks to address. In addition, particulate emissions are adversely affecting our health and of the freeway-adjacent neighborhoods in the downtown and leading areas. Finally, congestion is a big part of why transportation as a sector is the largest component of greenhouse gas emissions in our city and state. So why are we looking at pricing? As a city, we have taken many steps to try to alleviate our rising congestion. We're investing heavily in our transit systems, building out our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and improving more housing than ever near transit. And we've also implemented variable pricing of parking through our federally funded SF Park program. But it is not enough. We need more long-term federal funding, and in the near term, we hope to address our needs through congestion pricing and incentives because this strategy has the potential to dramatically and cost-effectively reduce traffic, improve public health, and increase equitable access. What is pricing? Let me address the basic components of a typical congestion pricing system. Pricing involves charging motorists a fee to drive in the busiest locations and times of day. Best practice usually combines pricing, transit, and discounts and incentives. Altogether, these policies and programs that new technologies now allow us to implement more effectively. In San Francisco, we began studying the feasibility of congestion pricing for our downtown area in 2008 with the support of a federal urban partnership agreement grant and value pricing program. That study found multiple benefits of a potential cordon, including 12% fewer rush hour trips, 20% faster bus speeds, and 16% lower emissions in the priced zone. The program also would generate about $80 million a year, as estimated in 2010. We successfully piloted an incentive-based program as well in 2016 with Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART, using federal value pricing pilot program funds. This project shifted 10% of riders to the off-peak shoulder hours during average weekday morning peaks, and this was possible by using very modest rider rewards. So the use of carrots and not just sticks is possible through technology. Recently, due to the return of severe congestion, our board asked us to update these studies and identify an implementable area pricing or cordon pricing program by the end of next year. We are partnering with state, regional, and local agencies to do that work currently. A common concern around congestion pricing is whether the use of price to manage demand is fair. We think about this in this important question in three ways. First, driving in San Francisco is an expensive way to commute. Most peak period drivers earn high incomes, and the lowest income travelers are generally on transit. For low-income motorists and choice commuters who would prefer to take transit but don't have good options, pricing comes with a built-in solution: revenues. Revenues to fund new affordable transit services as well as active transportation. Next, equity and efficiency have been balanced before in other sectors. Consider what happens in the power sector, where demand is high, rates rise. And as found in that sector, lifeline rates can help mitigate financial impacts of peak charges for those who need it most. Finally, beyond mitigating the impacts of pricing, we believe such programs can actually help make San Francisco's transportation more equitable. This is because traffic disproportionately affects poor neighborhoods, as I mentioned previously, through impacts to transit performance, pedestrian safety, and emissions. Traffic reduction and revenue generation can greatly benefit low-income communities. Going forward, we intend to directly involve these communities in the program design itself. We will seek input about fee levels, discounts, and how to invest net revenues from those most affected. And we will explore innovative new approaches like enabling frequent transit riders to earn toll credits for those times when they need to drive. In conclusion, San Francisco faces a steep challenge with congestion, and we think a congestion pricing pilot can move the city toward a healthier, more equitable future. Our agency and ITS America are hopeful that the FAST Act reauthorization will maintain policy and grow funding support for pricing strategies, as well as for deployment of new technologies. Federal support for pricing and technology deployment could build on existing programs like the Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies Deployment Program or Value Pricing Program, or take the form similar to the 2008 Urban Partnership Agreements that I mentioned previously. Based on the large response to the Smart Cities Challenge a few years ago, our region believes demand for congestion relief programs will be high. We urge the committee to consider expanding this program and to provide flexibility to cities, regions, and states in designing our respective solutions. Thank you again, and thank you for your leadership. I'm pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chang. Next, we will hear from Mr. Darren Hawkins, President and CEO of YRC Worldwide, Inc., who's speaking on behalf of the American Trucking Association. You can proceed, please.
Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chairman DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to testify on behalf of the American Trucking Association. And a special thanks to Congresswoman Davids for the intro and also for the representation in Kansas, where we have 1,200 employees and 6 specific operations. I am CEO of YRC Worldwide, one of the nation's largest trucking companies. We have 380 terminals nationwide and employ 31,000 non-union and union people across the country. Each year, we transport 20 million shipments with our 14,000 tractors and 45,000 trailers. Given that this is a National Truck Driving Appreciation Week, I would also like to offer a special thanks to our professional drivers and all truck drivers who work hard to deliver 71% of America's freight. While the trucking industry is willing to pay its fair share for infrastructure improvement, we believe that tolls are not the right solution, and in fact can be very harmful to our industry, our customers, and ultimately to all consumers. ATA does not oppose toll financing of new interstate highway lanes, nor do we oppose the conversion of HOV lanes to hot lanes. Our concern is with the tolling of existing general-purpose interstate highways. Tolling has very high collection costs relative to other highway user fees. A recent study found that converting all interstates into toll roads would cost more than $55 billion. While the cost of collection has come down with the introduction of transponders, costs can still exceed 10%. On some major toll facilities, these costs are much higher. On the Ohio Turnpike, for example, 19 cents out of every dollar is spent collecting tolls, while the Pennsylvania Turnpike's collection costs exceed 20%. Contrast this with the 0.2% cost of collecting federal fuel taxes. Of the $37 billion in federal fuel tax revenue collected in 2017, just $75 million went to collection. Compare this with the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which in 2016 spent more than $212 million to collect just over $1 billion. Clearly, the waste that goes into collecting a toll is simply unacceptable when far more efficient alternatives are available. Our user fees should be allocated to build roads and bridges, not to pay excessive toll road administrative fees, especially at a time when the American Society of Civil Engineers gives our roads a D grade and our bridges a grade of C+. Another significant problem is diversion of traffic to alternative routes. These routes are likely to be less safe and not as well constructed as the tolled highway. It is often claimed that one advantage of tolls is that it's a true user fee. Motorists pay to use the facility and the tolls cover the cost. In practice, this is not always the reality. In most cases, federal law allows states to shift excess tolling revenue to any Title 23 eligible purpose. This results in toll payers bankrolling projects that they may not benefit from. In addition, because the vast majority of roads can't support tolls, a small minority of motorists can be saddled with the subsidization of a state's surface transportation system, regardless of whether the toll payers benefit. Furthermore, states often look for opportunities to target motorists with little political power, such as non-state residents, particularly trucks engaged in interstate commerce. Several states and cities are exploring the use of congestion pricing to manage traffic congestion. This might be an effective tool for car drivers. However, since it's the customer who determines pickup and delivery times, often with penalties for late deliveries, pricing is not an effective tool for influencing truck travel choices. Today's e-commerce-driven supply chain sets the timeline in motion, and it will not be influenced by tolling. Therefore, pricing has very little impact on congestion caused by trucks. While ATA flatly opposes tolls on existing interstates and would prefer the elimination of all related federal tolling authority, we recognize that there is an interest in allowing tolls for certain purposes, specifically for very expensive bridge and tunnel projects and congestion management. ATA has recommended several changes to federal tolling law that will protect the public from the types of abuses I have described while still allowing tolls to be used under some circumstances. For example, states should be required to disclose the likely impacts of toll diversion on safety, congestion, and air quality. In addition, toll rate discrimination based on vehicle class or state of residence should be outlawed, and toll payers should not be forced to subsidize projects they don't benefit from. Finally, it is important to note that tolls will not solve the most important challenge facing this subcommittee, the impending bankruptcy of the Highway Trust Fund. Failure to address the shortfall will continue to induce states to consider bad options like tolls. ATA and nearly every organization that cares about surface transportation efficiency has proposed an increase in the fuel tax to address these needs, and we urge your support. Thank you again for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. We'll hear next from Timothy Lomax, Dr. Timothy Lomax, who's a Regents Fellow at Texas A&M Transportation Institute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ranking Member Davis, Chairman DeFazio, distinguished members of the subcommittee, appreciate the invitation to speak today regarding America's mobility and connectivity problems and some possible solutions. TTI is the most comprehensive higher education affiliated transportation research center in the United States. We've worked in all 50 states and in 51 countries, and last month we released the 24th edition of a national congestion estimate. You've heard today that our national congestion value of $166 billion. I'd point out that that doesn't include safety effects, environmental effects, the business inefficiencies that also come along with that. That's just the value of the wasted time and fuel. So how do we start to address these issues, the topic today? In a comprehensive analysis, you might look at 5 questions. What should we do? How much would it cost? How should we pay for it? What's the benefit of doing something? And what's the cost of doing nothing? Far too often we agree that all strategies should be considered and that the solutions will cost a lot. When we ask how we should pay for solving the problem, we hear this. This is where the crickets are supposed to play. There aren't enough conversations about how we would pay for the solutions. There aren't enough information about the benefits, and there certainly isn't enough discussion about the high cost of doing nothing. An analysis we did for the state of Texas projected that the total cost to sustain the 2010 condition of Texas's roads and highways would be $273 million over the next 25 years. The economic impact of doing nothing was $989 million. That was the estimated effect of continuing to do the same things, the same funding sources, and the same policies. It's clear that doing nothing is not free. I'd like to summarize a few other points from my written testimony. Congestion problems will continue to challenge metropolitan regions of all sizes. This is not just a big city problem. The projects, programs, and policies that each region uses to solve problems will be different. This is a reflection, I think, of the creativity and diversity in our country and in our metropolitan regions. The strategies are going to be different from region to region. They're also going to be different between a suburban area and the downtown area within the same metropolitan region. Just like a specific set of solution strategies are the result of a public engagement and technical design process, the level of congestion deemed unacceptable is also a local decision. One size doesn't fit all. For example, smaller urban areas are very likely going to expect higher average speeds on an urban freeway during rush hour than a larger urban area. I'd point out, not all congestion is bad. Sometimes it's a reflection of a vibrant area, and no congestion isn't always a good goal. But too much congestion makes it difficult to get from where you are to those vibrant activity centers. I'd point out that technology has a role. It may be showing commuters that what their travel options are. It could be helping plan a trip. It could be allowing frequent bus riders to use a toll road for a free trip every so often. Several states and regions have had success with the difficult conversation around more funding, new options, or changing policies. These are usually a combination of doing a good job, making sure the public understands that you're doing a good job, having a clear plan for the additional spending, committing to an effort that engages the public on determining which projects, programs, and funding sources to pursue, and providing an accountable, transparent reporting of the schedules, budgets, and effects. These solutions work. Almost every strategy works in some situation, and almost every strategy is the wrong treatment in some places and times. Anyone who tells you there's a single solution that can solve congestion, be publicly supported, and implemented everywhere is exaggerating the effect of their idea. I'd like to acknowledge the support of the University Transportation Centers program for the past urban mobility reports. We've been able to increase the number of urban areas analyzed, look at the economic effects of congestion on freight movements and the effect of transit on congestion levels. Our 2019 Urban Mobility Report was sponsored by the Texas Department of Transportation as part of their benchmarking process to address their congestion problem. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. There's more information about TTI on our website. I'm happy to answer questions about the important task of helping Americans get to their jobs, schools, shops, health facilities, and freight destinations to support a desirable quality of life and growth in economic opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax. Next, Mark Scribner, Senior Fellow, Competitive Enterprise Institute.
Chair Norton, Ranking Member Davis, Chair DeFazio, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify before you today. Congestion is a persistent and growing problem facing America's road networks, as Dr. Lomax just explained. The challenge facing policymakers is how to address it. Given that traffic congestion is inherently a local phenomenon, the federal government has a limited set of tools to address it. Fortunately, in its role as a supporting partner to state and local transportation agencies, there are policy options available to members of Congress to promote effective congestion mitigation and management. Even better, these tend not to involve increasing federal aid highway spending. Rather, modernizing federal law to permit greater flexibility at the state and local level to price road use is the best way to address peak hour traffic congestion that plagues many of America's metropolitan areas. Nobel laureate economist William Vickery, in a seminal 1963 paper, said of the then and still status quo of urban transportation management that in, quote, no other major area are pricing practices so irrational, so out of date, and so conducive to waste, unquote. The problem, as Vickery and other economists saw it, was scarce roadway space was inefficiently allocated by non-market means, so that the practical result of unpriced urban roads was queuing and a degradation of the network. With traffic flows increasingly unstable, travel times would lengthen and travel time predictability would worsen. In attempting to address this queuing due to a lack of pricing, policymakers would then make decisions to inefficiently expand physical roadway capacity, generally at great expense to society. This vicious cycle would then repeat itself. To effectively address peak hour traffic congestion and efficiently allocate scarce urban road space, Vickery proposed an electronic variable pricing scheme to promote stable traffic flows, quite similar to today's electronic transponder systems used by tolling networks such as EasyPass. Variable road pricing is now generally viewed by economists as the most effective means to address peak hour traffic congestion. Policymakers select a desired average speed to maintain and then let rising prices do the rest. Physical capacity expansions in the absence of pricing can temporarily reduce congestion and improve traffic flows, but such improvements may be fleeting due to what economist Anthony Downs calls triple convergence. Under triple convergence, traffic flows on recently expanded roads soon begin to trend toward their pre-expansion state of congestion, albeit with greater traffic volumes and the resulting benefits of that additional travel. In that sense, while roadway expansions can certainly benefit travelers in a given region, even at congested peak hours, in the absence of pricing, many of the potential benefits may be unrealized due to persistent network congestion. Section 166 HOV to HOT conversions are likely the most promising near-term vehicles for implementing road pricing. Historically, HOV lanes have suffered from chronic underutilization. Converting HOV lanes to HOT lanes allows road authorities to make better use of lane capacity while providing motorists traveling below minimum HOV occupancy requirements a choice to pay for shorter and more predictable travel times. However, existing exemptions and pilot programs by themselves will not be able to address the related problems of growing traffic congestion and aging highway infrastructure. Reconstruction needs of the interstate highway system alone are estimated to be more than $1 trillion over the next 2 decades. If Congress wishes to address both this fiscal challenge and traffic congestion, it must reconsider the general federal tolling prohibition. It should also seek to harness innovative financing and management practices made available through public-private partnerships by expanding project eligibility and lifting the lifetime volume cap on private activity bonds. Public acceptance of congestion pricing is crucial to its success. At a time when urban surface streets are riddled with potholes and other road infrastructure is being neglected, the first revenue priority of policymakers should be to improve the nation's tolled roadways to a state of good repair. Adherence to this fairness principle will do much to address public concerns that additional road charges will simply amount to more wasteful government spending to benefit politically favored constituencies. Road pricing generally and congestion pricing specifically will be valuable tools going forward. The primary federal concern should not be the implementation of any given pricing project. Rather, Congress should focus on removing outdated barriers to road pricing and give states the flexibility to use these tools that best suit their own needs. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the subcommittee, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scribner. I want to thank all of you for your valuable testimony today, and we're going to move now to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions. I begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Gilbert, I noticed you had an illustration in your testimony. You said that the lanes on the right, I mean, even people far away can see, the lanes on the right are non-tolled, and the lanes on the left are tolled. Is that right?
I believe it's correct.
Now, so I see a lot of congestion on the right. It looks like people are not willing to get into this lane. And is this only tolling that describes where people will go here?
There are toll lanes, and the one on the, I believe the left should be the toll lane. We know that overall, with regard to Miami-Dade County, it's been successful in reducing congestion for both sides.
So this picture does not, see, this doesn't show reducing congestion. It shows people, it shows lots of room on the right here, my right, and it looks as though people are saying, no, thank you. Are the tolls very high?
The tolls can be high, and let me just clarify also, reducing congestion doesn't mean eliminating congestion. We still have bad congestion. It just got a little better with bus, express, rapid transit, and the express lanes.
So they use this other side, though?
Yes.
Can they use this road? Can they use this toll road?
Well,
Buses and...
If they pay the toll, they can, yes.
Yeah. I mean, do they?
Oh, yes, they do.
They do, because I don't see any of them. I see, it just happens to be when this picture was taken.
Well, no, Madam Chair, I assure you, the toll lane gets pretty crowded also. We just have a lot of people and a lot of traffic in Miami-Dade County as a region. So we know that the times have gotten better, but still, I think of the lost business hours, the lost production, the lost time you spend with your family. We have to do something. The tolls have helped. We need more help. And so people do use the toll lanes, and they do get very expensive.
Mr. Hawkins, do you object to the use of toll lanes and the way we know that you testified against tolls? I don't know if trucks pay tolls or would pay tolls on such a lane. What is your view?
My company alone pays $25 million annually in tolls across the United States. So certainly from a CEO perspective and an ATA perspective, we don't support new tolling on interstate highways. Now, certain tolling can be appropriate to handle specific issues around the country and select cities, but overall, we don't feel like it's the solution. When I think about some of the opening comments, if we'd have been sitting in church this morning when Chair DeFazio made his opening comments, I would have said amen when he mentioned that not since 1993 has Congress increased our federal fuel tax to invest in our infrastructure. Just the nickel example that he gave, if we did that immediately, that would generate $340 billion in long-term predictable financing that would address a lot of these issues and expand current roads without tolling.
Mr. Hawkins, a lot of us up here would agree with you and agree with Mr. DeFazio as well on that issue. I do want to ask a question, though, of Ms. Chang. I'm very intrigued by the technologies and what they can do, and believe, frankly, that they're going to be necessary if we're going to move these congestion issues. How do we make sure they are deployed with equity considerations in mind? And I'd be interested whether you all have thought that through as a part of your recommendation.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Norton. This is a top concern for our local community and policymakers as well. We have seen that the technology has come to a point where we can actually implement some of the policy responses on equity and features of programs that we've long wanted but haven't been able to truly deploy cost effectively. Examples would be the ability to more strategically target, those types of road users who we believe need to have discounts and exemptions, enabling them to have accounts using their transponders, which are the electronic detection systems in the vehicles that allow the trip to be measured, to allow us to be able to connect that to a particular household and understand what are
any experimental work being done on that?
Pardon me?
Is there any pilot work being done on that to connect
I
to?
see. Elsewhere, absolutely, certainly on the express lanes and express roads that have been discussed in other places and in our own Bay Area region, yes. But we don't have that in San Francisco quite yet. We're still studying it for the downtown zone.
Thank you very much. I will move now to Mr. Davis, who I recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to the witnesses for your testimony, for being here. Very important issue. As I said in my opening statements, congestion even hits a district like mine with its rural and many urban areas. According to the TTI's report in 2017, congestion in certain cities in my district, like Springfield, Illinois, cost residents about $300 a year. In Decatur, Illinois, about $240, and in Champaign, Illinois, $225. North of me, north of my district, a couple hours, is Chicago. Commuters there saw an average cost of $1,307 in 2017. I've recently seen reports that the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Lightfoot, is considering a congestion pricing scheme to address traffic. Now, that may work in Chicago, but I'm really not convinced it's going to work in the smaller cities that I represent. And as we examine this issue of congestion, are there other ways besides congestion pricing schemes that we can use to address the problem? And I'll start with you, Mr. Lomax.
Strategies other than pricing, I think we're talking about using sort of the whole toolbox, if you will. We've got issues that Ms. Chang talked about of operations. We heard earlier about timing traffic signals, getting the crashes and stalled vehicles out of the way. These are kind of good government, basic policy kinds of approaches that everybody accepts. I think
things that should be working right now in some of our smaller mini urban areas.
Exactly. They cut across all regions of all sizes. I think adding capacity where you see growth or you have bottlenecks is certainly a a plus and certainly part of the toolbox, and that could be road capacity, transit capacity, more bike lanes, more pedestrian paths. I mean, it has to be tailored to the problem. And certainly having additional conversations with employers and employees about, can I have flexible work hours? Can I look at alternate commuting paths, things like that. Technology has a role, as I said. Smartphone apps help you plan a trip. Well, maybe we could have that smartphone app push information to you based on your calendar that says, hey, you're just going to go to the office today. You don't have anything really chaotic. Why don't you try the bus or try carpooling with somebody, and I can go out and match your carpool trips while you're taking a shower and report back to you when you're eating breakfast.
Okay. Anybody else? Got any ideas? Want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You going to say amen?
Amen.
All right, there you go.
Good morning. I think it's a wonderful point, especially when we think about Illinois. Just my company alone, we've got 16 terminals there and 3,000 employees. And you mentioned in a more rural area about the cost of being a couple $100 annually for congestion. Chair Norton mentioned in her high-density district of it being over $1,700. And if we average that across the United States, it's about $1,600 per person. If we go with the fuel tax that we've talked about many times over and that hasn't been adjusted since 1993, we're talking about an annual impact of $100 per person. So when we think about rural versus density and then congestion pricing, and the last thing on congestion pricing, everyone in this room and everyone in the United States have become accustomed to a point-and-click mentality. When you point and click and make a purchase, you expect your doorbell to ring with that product very quickly, and that tolling, other things, congestion pricing is not going to impact what transportation companies have to do to meet the expectations of their customer base.
Great. Else, Ms. Chang?
Yes, Ranking Member Davis, thank you for the question. I believe that the built-in solution that I mentioned of the revenues from a congestion pricing type of program are important to mention here. I mean, we all need better options as far as active transportation, public transit, new express buses. These are all things that revenues can help pay for. There are carpool incentives, van pool incentives, employer-based programs, a whole host of very creative solutions on the public and private side. Developers are now asking, instead of building that parking, what if I invested in a system of shuttles? What if I incentivized bike share and car share? What if I partnered with the development down the street and we shared a microtransit? So first, last mile solutions, the whole landscape of solutions is starting to change. And the idea of using proceeds not only for funding direct infrastructure, but also incentives to let people try these things out, maybe and also a new opportunity.
Well, I'm glad you closed with incentives, because the problem we have here in the federal government is we have a trust fund that doesn't keep up, so we're having to add money to it. But many states may have a surplus in some of their trust funds, so those user fees then get pulled out and used to fill other budget holes. And that's something that I think the panelists and all of us in this committee ought to consider when we look at federal solutions. I'm out of time. I yield back nothing, but thanks again for your the opportunity to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. In your answers, you mentioned, both witnesses mentioned public transit. I note we don't have a public transit witness. I don't want anybody to think that we think such that alternative is outmoded. We think it ought to be used more than it is. Of course, I speak from a region that has Metro and uses that. So the fact that we don't have a witness doesn't mean that we don't understand the transit, public buses, rapid transit, still to be a part of the solution. Expensive to build, still to be a part of the solution. Mr. DeFazio.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just in response to the ranking member's comments, the Federal Highway Trust Fund monies are not ever spent and never have been spent on other than transportation purposes. So the diversion here is not a problem. If you're concerned that if we should increase federal revenues, that states would then choose to divert more of their funds to non-transportation purposes, we can certainly build in a maintenance of effort provision. And also, in terms of these optional tolling things we've allowed, we shouldn't allow any diversion of funds or the flexibility that's being granted beyond, uses the benefit those users. So I think there are ways to deal with that, but the bottom line is we need more investment. Now, Dr. Lomax, I know TTI, I appreciate your work. I always quote it, use it in trying to justify some people around here to move off of zero on funding. But this tolling, I'm a little disturbed about all the obsession and talk about tolling and congestion pricing and all that. And I think since you are in Texas, haven't we seen a little bit of tolling fatigue in Texas? Didn't they just pass a moratorium on more tolling there?
Absolutely. That's what our state legislature did in response to some public comment about we're sort of tired of tolling as the solution that's being enacted.
Right, and it didn't solve the problems.
Well, we're early on, but yeah, it hasn't solved the problems yet.
Okay.
We're afflicted with economic prosperity is the way we describe it.
Yeah. Mayor Gilbert, you just said a couple of times quite high, the tolls. Can you give me a number how high was on those tolled lanes to avoid the congestion?
You know, it depends on the time of day. It can be upwards of $17, $18, $19 that people will pay in the toll lanes. And let me just say that.
How many miles is that for $18?
Well, that would be the entire length of the.
But I don't know the length of it. I've only been on it a couple of times.
About 10 miles.
Okay.
10 miles.
All right.
10 miles.
So, I mean, the question I have, and I turn to Mr. Brower, because in his testimony, he talks about hot lanes won't provide enough congestion relief. And so we're talking about variable pricing. And I mean, we're talking $1.70 a mile there. We've seen almost $5 a mile in DC. What kind of public acceptance do you think that is going to have? And how high do you have to price it to get to your targets to reduce congestion?
Chairman DeFazio, as we've done just our initial analysis of tolling, we are at a point of hypercongestion on the Portland system where we have so many vehicles at rush hour that the system is actually breaking down and the throughput collapses. Our consultants have told us that if we move a relatively small number of vehicles off the system at rush hour, it will flow much better, and we can actually see our throughput increase greatly. We already see that effect in a number of places today where throughput is better before rush hour than it is at rush hour.
So you think there are a lot of people optionally jumping into the curves and backed up traffic? They're not doing that because they have to get their kid to soccer at a certain time. They're not doing it because they have to get to work at a certain time or they leave work at a certain time. It's just people who decide to go out and therefore they won't come anymore and they'll change their schedules. So you think there's enough people that are just out there optionally that don't have to go somewhere when I wouldn't want to try and go anywhere. You think that's going to solve this?
Chairman DeFazio, I think there's probably a relatively limited number of people who are in that situation, but if we can move a few of them off, we actually did some public opinion research, and people saw as one of the best arguments in favor of tolling with variable rates that there are some opportunities for people to change their schedules, to move by a different mode, or to telecommute or take other ways of getting to work.
Some people may have that flexibility. The question is how many. We were very light here on the panel. I'm very disappointed that we really didn't get very much into technology. I mean, and there's one company in my district called Connected Signals. They have a very simple system where basically in the car, you know what, if you're on a road that has synchronized lights, you're sometimes tempted to speed up to try and get to the next light, or you're going to slow down. But this will tell you exactly, like there's a sweet spot where you can drive that whole road and never hit a light. They're estimating that there could be, if we did a lot more coordinated signalization, synchronized signalization, we could save probably another % of fuel and mitigate congestion. Again, I was in Pittsburgh, smart traffic lights. You don't sit there when no one's coming. It seems to me, and then when we ultimately get to, and we are a ways away, driverless or substantially driver-assisted vehicles, and you don't have the stop and go so much. I've seen estimates so we can have twice the throughput on the existing roadways that we currently have. So, I mean, I really think that we're awfully heavy here on pricing, and I think we're heavy here on pricing because of the failure of the federal government to partner with local jurisdictions and to hold up its end of the bargain for a national transportation system. It isn't state by state. I didn't bring my poster today, my famous poster of the brand new Kansas Turnpike ending at the Oklahoma state line until we had the Eisenhower plan. This needs to be a coordinated federal system. We need to go heavily into the 21st century new technologies and look at all the options before us. And so with that, Madam Chair, thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you very much, Chairman DeFazio. Mr. Crawford, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a real quick question, Mr. Hawkins. In your written testimony, you discussed the need to tax electric vehicles. Currently, electric vehicle drivers are effectively paid by the American taxpayer to use roads through the qualified plug-in electric vehicle tax credit. Can you elaborate on why this is problematic, especially for commercial drivers?
Well, when you look at it as a whole, and certainly some of the points that have already been made around the fuel tax and other pieces, and the longevity of that as technology changes, I think a lot of times we overestimate what we can accomplish in the next year, and we underestimate what can be accomplished in the next 5 years on many of these technology fronts, and especially electrification, which personally, as CEO of YRC Worldwide, and with the number of tractors that we have right now, diesel tractors, it's very important to us how that evolves over time, and also for a company that spends north of $25 million a month on diesel, electrification can mean a lot to our industry and also a lot to the economy overall. So. Big fan of electrification and how that goes, and when I think about the Highway Trust Fund, myself and the ATA's opinion is the fuel tax is the appropriate measure for now because of the situation we're in and the urgency of the matter around the Highway Trust Fund with potential insolvency by 2021. So overall, electrification will be a wonderful solution over time.
So the fuel tax is what you would advocate for, increasing the fuel tax on gas and non-farm diesel?
Yep, as we sit here today and what we're facing and also what we forced individual states into doing from a tolling perspective and others to try and deal with the crumbling infrastructure we have around the United States, and that interstate commerce depends on this overall. And as we think about our 45,000 miles of interstates in the United States and how we protect those and keep them open freely for free movement among states, if this continues on the path that we're on, from what we've seen from 3 or 4 individual states, it could become a epidemic sooner than later. So as we sit here today, I see it as an emergency, and because of that, the fuel tax is the immediate remedy. From a technology perspective and the other pieces, we've got some great information that's coming now through ELDs, through the federal mandate on electronic logging devices in commercial vehicles. I'm also a member of the board of American Transportation Research Institute, and a lot of the stats that's been quoted here today, we're able to collect those because companies like mine and all others, FedEx, UPS, all of the big transportation players are making their ELD data available. So this committee will have a lot more data to work with moving forward from a technology standpoint on how we address this in certain pockets.
So, you're saying right now, fuel tax increase, as the chairman indicated before, the last time we messed with the fuel tax was 1993. I think one of the flaws that we didn't anticipate then was that it wasn't indexed. So it hasn't kept pace with the economy. What does it look like to your mind? What's the appropriate action to take with regard to a fuel tax?
When we look at that, our recommendation would be a 5-cent increase per year over the next 4 years. And that's the $340 billion long-term number that I mentioned. And then also the impact would be $100 per year when we think about the congestion stats. Now, certainly, I know that all constituents would say $100 a year. Are you kidding? That comes directly out of my grocery bill and other places. And I understand that as fuel prices have a direct impact on the pocketbook of every American. I understand the sensitivity, but also every American, I believe, is also witnessing firsthand the infrastructure trouble that we have with bridges and roads all over. I traveled here from Baltimore this morning, and the situation from Baltimore to D.C., if you haven't done it in a car recently, it's tough, and there's a lot of opportunity that could be addressed.
So you're suggesting, if I'm clear, a 5-cent per gallon increase on gasoline and on non-farm diesel?
Yes,
And that would increase 5 cents for every year over a period of 4 years?
yes,
So in 5 years, we'd have an increase in 20 cents a gallon?
that is correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you clearly on that and what your recommendations are, and appreciate your comments, and I'll yield back.
Well, I appreciate, Mr. Crawford, that you drew out the witness on this matter. I'm interested, you said it was fuel tax, maybe $100 a year. It's not as if we hadn't had an experiment already in this. The state's already doing it. What are we afraid of? Whatever happened to that $100 a year, people have clearly measured that against getting to work late and other impediments on the road, and they have accepted in the states. The only people who haven't accepted it are sit in this building, the Congress of the United States. Going next to Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the witnesses for your testimony today. Mr. Scribner, you are with CEI, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest organization supporting pro-market approaches to infrastructure investment and management. Does that, do you have any problems with raising the gas tax, or is that against free market principles?
I testified at a hearing in March before the Ways and Means Committee, and I was the only witness to oppose raising the federal gas tax. I think we can better. I think there are a lot of problems with the federal programs, and I think that we could better align incentives properly if we were to focus on, if we were to keep the fuel tax at the same level and focus on reforms in other areas, specifically getting rid of the prohibitions on tolling and expanding opportunities for private financing.
Yeah, not just tolling, but which tends to be everybody paying a fee to drive on a highway, but actually kind of hot lanes is what you promote. Isn't that correct?
Hot lanes, I think, if they fit the right purpose, that's great. I also think in the long term we should be looking towards a replacement for fuel taxation through mileage-based user fees, and I strongly support an effort of this Congress to do that.
Basically, congestion pricing is what you advocate for.
I think congestion pricing can be a valuable tool in areas where it's too expensive to expand capacity.
Let me ask you this. Can you shed some light on how congestion pricing alleviates congestion in metropolitan areas?
So if you saw at the I-66 lanes inside the Beltway that have been brought up here that have the kind of notorious high tolls.
And the hot lane looks good when it's $42 for a 10-mile segment. In Georgia, in Atlanta last week, we got up to $17 for a 12-mile stretch of road, and it was like big news. But here for $42 for 10 miles, I bet you that hot lane was pretty much empty, but there was congestion in the 2 or 3 lanes on the other side of the hot lane.
Now, when we hear
So my question is, how, given if what I said is true, how does the hot lane or congestion pricing alleviate traffic congestion?
So what you're talking about, when you're talking about those very high prices, the $40-some on 66, you're talking about a handful of people actually pay that.
Even if it's only $1, even if it's only $1.50 for 10 miles, you're still going to see that lane relatively easy flow,
right.
But the 3 lanes to the side are still congested. How does the hot lane cure that traffic congestion?
The idea is for within the hot lane,
I understand the idea, but
Yeah.
in effect, it has not worked.
So it causes, often you run into problems if you have too many exemptions, for instance. So if you say you don't
All right,
have,
well,
if you,
okay, all right. Well, thank you. I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
Mr. Hawkins, what are your thoughts on these hot lanes and how they can actually cure the issue of traffic congestion in urban areas at all times of the day? Not just, we have congestion in this area 24/7 in some places.
Well, Congressman, Atlanta specifically, the Atria board that I'm on, as you know, two of the worst congestion areas in the country are both in Atlanta. So because of that, addressing Atlanta, and I will also say in my opening comments, when I said 71% of the nation's goods come by truck, in Atlanta it's 85% because of the geography of that area. So Atlanta's crucial, and it's a wonderful city for our business. Our business there is great. But the congestion in Atlanta and some of the work we're doing right now around hours of service and other things actually are triggered toward Atlanta market, and that us taking more trucks off the road during those congestion periods so that we can enter and exit that city appropriately by working with technology to not make the situation worse. But overall, I think the investments that Atlanta have made are to be commended, and that also rebuilding and extending and expanding the infrastructure in Atlanta is crucial because the city is just such a powerhouse in the nation, especially for transportation.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I should address the full committee chair, my friend Chairman DeFazio. I've been on this committee for 9 years. For 8 of those years, I had to hear my good friend from Oregon rail on us about not doing anything. In his opening statement today, he railed again. I only assume that maybe he's railing not on us anymore because we're in the minority. He must be railing on leadership because, Mr. Chairman, just put a bill out there. Let's have a bill to talk about. I think it's interesting that your top 10 bills, the majority, 1 through 10, HR 1 through 10, none of them address infrastructure. 3 don't have a topic in them. So put one of those in one of those 1 through 10 bills, Mr. Chairman. Put a bill out there. And so I just remind you, you're on the majority now. I kind of thought maybe I was back in another twilight zone, because I've heard the same thing for the last 8 years. To the panel, a couple of thoughts. Once in a while, I do drive back to Ohio, and I try to avoid rush hour on the outer belt, because you can add a couple hours to my 6-7 hour drive. My experience seeing during rush hour, the HOV lanes, I think are a joke. I think it's just our behavior, our culture, that we don't carpool or we're too independent or it doesn't work. I've seen, on stop and go in the outer belt and the HOV lanes that hardly have any traffic. So now that this new concept, the tolling on these other lanes, and Madam Chair raised a picture there about congestion on the 3 lanes and the other 2, about utilization. In industry, if you're in a manufacturing facility, if you're not, operating at least 80%, you've got a problem. I guess my question is, on those other lanes, when you're doing, I guess it'd be to Mr. Gilbert and Mr. Bromer, Oregon, have you ever experimented around during rush hour to just open up everything to everybody and see what happens, and then figure out then also if you're still going to toll in those other lanes, where's that sweet spot so people still use it, so you're getting a certain percentage of utilization. Because if you're only getting 40 or 50% utilization on the tolling lanes, you're probably, your fee's not high enough. You've got a problem. So you got to get this balance there. Does that make sense? But have you ever opened up all the lanes just to see what happens?
I don't think we actually do that. I think what we're also missing from that picture are the buses. And so when I gave the statistic that the ridership increased 46% over the first 2 years, what that tells us is that some people got out of their cars, got on the bus Express Rapid Transit, and took it down there. And the fellow panelist was right. You don't have to take a lot of cars off to make a difference. So what we know from data is that the time got better because of bus Express Rapid Transit
I got
and
that.
and the hot and the whole.
Another observation I've made, especially out here in the Outer Belt or Columbus, Ohio, and their Outer Belt, during the peak periods, the rush hour periods, all those lanes, there might be 5, 6, 7 lanes, are congested, okay? But then non-peak hours, there's a lot of room out there, so we just can't build a bunch of more capacity to meet a certain amount of time. That's why we need to be adopting more technology and other things. But I am kind of intrigued with this concept of the what you call the hot lanes, but I don't want to make them some people, I think my friend here from Florida calls it Lexus lanes. So you got to get a balance there. So the goal should be that you're getting maximum utilization of all the lanes. That's why I hate the HOV concept, because I think that's a failure. When you got stop and go over here, and you got an HOV lane that's 10% or 20% utilization, or you took a 4-lane highway and you made an HOV lane, so you cut 25% of the lanes, probably 20% of the capacity. That's a problem. We're not thinking straight. So that's why I think that we need to do more research on this concept, and because I don't think we can build a whole bunch of capacity, additional capacity, to address a few hours Monday through Friday without trying to change behavior or incentives to make people change their work habits or whatever. That's what I'm thinking about. So, I think it'd be an interesting experiment to see what you do when you open up all the lanes, to see what happens during rush hour, and then see how you do a variable pricing scheme. Does that make,
Congressman, we'll look at it. I will say that I don't think that tolling is necessarily the answer. I think it's one of the answers. So we're talking about these issues as though it's either tolling or something else. It's probably some tolling. It's probably the gas tax. It's probably rapid transit. It's probably bus rapid transit. The problem with the system is that everyone has a pedestrian view of what they want to accomplish with it. Right now, we're talking about tolling, and I don't think anybody up here just really wants to have more tolling. Tolling was responsive to an absence of funding in the system and a lot of congestion.
My time's up, so I'll interrupt you. I just want to make sure that our capacity we have, we're getting maximum utilization. I'm not so sure some of the things we're doing are doing that. Yield back. Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Gibbs. I appreciate your rendition, Mr. Gilbert, of the combination of strategies we will need, as opposed to one size fits all. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. In Maryland, there are several ongoing efforts to expand and toll high commuter roadways, most notably I-495, known as the Capitol Beltway, as well as the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, which is owned by the National Park Service. I've opposed these efforts to widen and to toll these roads. I support tolling more in the case of new facilities, not in existing facilities, and I don't view expanding existing facilities as a new facility. But I also think, as Chairman DeFazio and others mentioned, it falls disproportionately on particularly working families that don't have the flexibility in their commute. Mayor Gilbert, two of the original alternatives put forward in the NEPA study for this Capitol Beltway project I just mentioned included dedicated bus managed lane and fixed guideway bus rapid transit alternatives. Unfortunately, they were not included in the list of screened alternatives. In fact, none of the transit alternatives were included in the final list. And you say in your written testimony, and I wanted you to an opportunity to expand on this because you were about to do that in response to the last question. You said that electronic tolled express lanes are essential, but we believe the best long-term alternative to highly congested roadways in Miami-Dade is to expand our rapid transit network. Seems like, and I think Dr. Lomax agrees as well in his written testimony, you have to provide choices. Can you just talk about that combination and the real value added with your express bus system?
Express bus it has to be an option, and tolls have to be an option, but it only really works right if you actually have rapid transit that's available. If you don't, you are starting to price people out of the ability to get places very quickly. So the system isn't meant to be a one-off system. And right now, that's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to find this silver bullet to actually, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to fix it. Bus rapid transit is going to be important. on 95 in those express lanes. But it's not going to be the answer because we still have the first and the last miles. So we know that rapid transit down our major corridors is going to be important, but it's not going to be the answer because those are just the major corridors. We need a system that actually addresses all of the needs. And if we're going to fund that system, that's probably going to take some type of tolling. It's probably going to take adjusting the gas tax.
Let me ask you though, on that last mile. So are the buses only traveling on the interstate highway, or have you also expanded bus service into the communities?
We have an extensive bus service, but the bus express rapid transit is primarily in those areas. What we've done, for instance, in my hometown and a lot of the cities in Miami-Dade County is we have free shuttles. The Miami Gardens Express that Congresswoman Wilson referenced was actually our effort to actually take people from the major corridors into the interior areas of the city where buses don't necessarily take you very often. And so we didn't want people sitting out there waiting, for instance, to get to an internal park. So we put all of those things on a free shuttle, and that's our answer to that last mile and the first mile because it actually takes you to the major commercial corridors. A number of cities in South Florida have that. But let me just say, those are built out through a half penny that we actually started collecting, I guess, 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And the city's portions of it, that's how we provide those shuttles.
And let me ask you this. Would the express lanes, the electronic tolled express lanes, would that work? I mean, would you be achieving the kinds of successes that you're achieving without express bus if you didn't include the express bus in it?
No, I don't believe we would. I believe the increase in that ridership over the first 2 years shows us that people do want an option to getting out of their vehicle, and they don't necessarily want to pay the prices that are associated with the express lanes themselves.
Dr. Lomax, is there anything that you want to expand on in terms of diversifying travel options?
I think it's key that the strategies are all the strategies are going to be needed. I think maybe another component of this is the public engagement process. We've had some discussion about that. I think part of the issue of resolving the funding crisis is going to be to make sure that people understand what the money's going for. I don't think they get a real sense of what the value proposition is. And in the cases where funding has been increased, there's a very clear connection between what you're paying and what you're getting.
I know in the mobility report, you looked at the DC region and you've seen the costs of doing nothing. So do you think it makes sense to expand the 495 system without including at least a look at bus rapid transit or other transit options?
In general, I think transit options are a great part of the express lane system. I haven't studied the 494 Capital Beltway in detail.
Thank you. I yield back nothing as well, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Mr. Katko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mayor Gilbert, you were cut off from what your last statement was with Mr. Gibbs, but I think you were saying that congestion pricing is a product of us not properly funding the Federal Highway Fund and having the money to make these roads. Is that correct?
Not just you. No, it's not just you all not funding. It's a product of a lot of things. That's a part of it. The system, the roads not being wide enough. In some places, the road not being able to be wide enough. The absence of rapid transit. There's not one single cause to the problem. There are a lot of causes to the problem, and how we address it and how we solve it, it's going to be a lot of different solutions. And so I wouldn't by any means say that it's just on you all. Some might say that. I wouldn't say that. I say that it's a big part because you all have the ability to affect a lot of, every state. You have the ability to move projects along. So it's not your fault solely, but we all need to do better in addressing the congestion, because the congestion, look, we don't talk about this in terms of just time sometimes. Think about it in terms of people and time they're spending with their family and people growing their businesses and commerce. It actually has a cost. We're losing money with our families. We're losing money with our jobs in our industry. We're losing everything because we don't address this.
Yeah, the annual, in 2017, the annual estimated cost of congestion was approximately $166 billion. And I don't know what other factors went into it, but that doesn't seem unrealistic to me, given what some of these cities go through, like you mentioned. I want to take a step back, because it's clear to me that the Federal Highway Fund is a huge component of any cure to this matter. let's not forget that 20% of the funding goes to mass transit. And if the federal highway fund isn't being properly managed, there's less funds going for mass transit, and that puts even more pressure on the state and local governments. And you're not going to develop your mass transit if you don't have a steady stream of funding. And that's a big concern to me. So I want to take a step back and kind of look at some other components of our failure as a country, no matter what the reason, of having proper infrastructure. The wear and tear in vehicles is something that people need to estimate into this. So can anybody give me an idea of the wear and tear, the estimates on the wear and tear in vehicles, both personal and trucks? Ms. Chang and then Mr. Hawkins.
Yes, Congressman. Last year when we were looking at SB1, our California gas tax increase, there were estimates of about $800 to $900 per year per household vehicle, as far as the cost of repairs from potholes and road maintenance.
And what type of repairs are we talking about? Just the wear and tear in tires and all the other things?
It could be, I'm sorry, I don't have the details, but that was the overall estimate for the cost of repairing a vehicle.
Per household?
Per household.
Okay. And Mr. Hawkins, I know there's some in the trucking industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And outside of commercial vehicles, those numbers we were quoting earlier around rural and high-density areas, the $1,600 annually, that estimate includes vehicle maintenance and congestion costs for households. So that was the estimate that included the cost of maintaining a vehicle on roads that are crumbling.
So we've had, I'm just wondering if that's factored in enough in the discussion here of the cost estimates of doing something with the highway fund. The highway fund has not been indexed for inflation, so therefore it's woefully short. And we've seen estimates as much as $171 billion shortfall over the next 10 years. So something has to be done to at least plug that gap. And we have to account for the fact that more vehicles are non-gasoline burning vehicles. I know UPS and FedEx, for example, are ordering fleets of electric vehicles. And they're going to be riding the roads not paying anything from a gas tax standpoint. So I'm concerned about that as well.
And Congressman, that's why I spoke in terms of the next 4 years for that piece. And just take New York, for instance. 93% of the goods for the people of New York come by truck. So because of that, that's not going to change anytime soon. And we have to invest in that. And from my opinion, taking on the Highway Trust Fund and doing the right thing is really an investment in our economy. And if we continue to ignore it and not make those investments, then what we're doing is saying it's going to be okay to put our economy in continued decline because we don't have adequate infrastructure for the movement of goods across our country.
And if these repair estimates are actually legit, and I think I've heard them from a lot of different sources and companies in general, if they are legit, I'm not sure that doing something with the funding stream is going to be an increased cost to the consumer. It may end up being an ultimate net savings. And so I'm just not sure why we haven't done this. We didn't do it when we were in the majority, so I don't fault the Democrats for not doing it now. But I think we need to get together on this. This is a quintessentially bipartisan issue, and we should get together on this and stop the discussion and just acknowledge that we are probably going to save consumers and businesses a lot of money in the long run if we have the political courage to do what we need to do to fix the revenue stream. And part of it has to address the alternative fuel component, which is a big part of it.
Amen, Congressman.
Thank you. I yield back.
I appreciate the members' questions and remarks. Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent a district in New Jersey from which a number of my constituents commute to New York City. So congestion pricing is a very big issue for us. A lot of folks commute by train, but that option is not available to everybody because of decades of underinvestment by both regional governments and the federal government. And so a lot of people are driving their cars to New York City. And they're worried about New York City's proposed congestion pricing plan. I absolutely get that New York has a problem and that they need to look for solutions to address that problem. But I'm obviously concerned, as are my constituents, about the impact that's going to have. So let me start with questions to some of the local officials who've been through this, maybe Mr. Brower, Ms. Chang, Mayor Gilbert. When you're thinking about congestion pricing, the various ideas that we've discussed here, are you doing this or conceiving of it to encourage drivers to take different routes or not to get in their cars at all?
Congressman, really, when you're looking at tolling and congestion pricing, you are trying to find a multitude of ways to change behavior. One would be for people to perhaps not drive at rush hour, drive at a different time. Another would be to take a different mode, bike to work, walk to work, take transit, or perhaps carpool. There is also the potential for people to take a different route that would be untolled, and perhaps, ideally, that's a better route as opposed to one that creates diversion. So in reality, it is really all of the above, multiple options for people to find different ways to not use those extremely congested routes, and then ideally improve the transportation system as a whole for all people. We in the Portland metro region have a great transit system for a city of its size. About 45% of commute trips into the central business district are by transit, and we hope that the I-5 proposal that we are moving forward would help provide an additional incentive for people to use transit to get into the central business district. God and the FTA willing, we'll have light rail, one more leg into the central business district in the next few years. That will help with that.
Understood. Well, look, for my folks, hundreds of thousands of people in New Jersey, there are basically three options. You either drive across a bridge or a tunnel, you take the train, or you swim across the Hudson River. So not a lot of options there. And so that leads to my next question. If public transit is the option, which in many cases really will be the only option, and we do go towards congestion pricing, shouldn't some of those revenues be used to support expansion of public transit? And that can be for anybody.
Yes.
Thank you. Does anyone disagree? And I think, Mr. Scribner, you noted the New York
I have a
area
yes, but.
I'll take the yes part of that at least.
Okay.
Yeah. And for me, this gets back ultimately to where Chairman DeFazio was, because even the question I just asked suggests that the burden is entirely on the shoulders of local and regional authorities. And to the extent that they share that burden, I believe, certainly in the case of New York, that some of those funds need to be spent to help New Jersey Transit and regional rail networks bring people into the city. But it can't just be that, and I think this is more than just about money. This is a dignity question. I mean, whether it's government or the private sector, in so many areas, we are seeing people being asked to pay more for services, for things that used to be taken for granted. Whether you want to take a bag on a plane or not waste your life in traffic, you are being asked to pay more. And I wonder, are we solving problems here or just finding new ways to divide our fellow Americans based on income? Are we finding new ways to remind some of our fellow Americans that they are worth less? And if there is not federal investment, if there is not a policy that is based on the American people sharing this burden in an equitable way, aren't we in effect having that impact on our fellow Americans? For anybody.
Congressman, I really appreciate that sentiment. I think that we all feel that the federal role over the past now 40 years has reduced so much to the point where all of us do need to reach for this new tool in the toolbox. The technology is there if we wish to do it, but these are hard decisions. These are difficult and complex challenges. The solutions are there, and we're being creative, and we're learning from cities around the world and from one another about how to do it. But I do think we're very, very keenly in need of the significant federal role in transportation and infrastructure and transit and all the rest in order to really have a resilient and sustainable national infrastructure.
Thank you.
May
yield
I
back.
comment quickly?
Certainly.
Congressman,
That's okay.
excellent point, and I think it's important to separate the federal interstate piece from a local city or opportunity. When you think about Newark to New York or Atlanta, Houston, some of the really tough density problems with congestion, but then separate from a federal aspect, protecting interstate commerce on the 45,000 miles of interstate, I do believe is a federal issue.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony. So it's very difficult for me to go back to North Carolina, where a congestion problem in North Carolina is very different than it might be in some of your cities, and suggest that what we're going to do is raise taxes so that you can have less congestion in your cities. So how do I sell that? Mr. Mayor, how would I sell it? And I came from Florida, so I know your area extremely well. So how do I convince people that they need to raise their taxes so that you can have less congestion in Miami-Dade?
You don't start by saying it like that. So you don't do that.
But that's what it is.
Well, I don't know that it is. I think you actually humanize it first. And I'm not suggesting that you sell it. I'm not suggesting that everything is right for every area. But I think that you do.
But why don't you just raise your taxes to take care of your congestion? Why is it a federal responsibility? Now, I get back to the interstate commerce side of it, and I'm all in from a federal standpoint. But why, with all due respect to my friend from New Jersey, why do you think the people of North Carolina should pay more taxes so that he can have a better commute into the city?
Well, first, we're in it together with the United States of America. That's going to be the first thing. The second thing is when trucks get off of the interstate, they can't drive on dirt roads on our streets.
Well, we're not. Listen, we can have hyperbole all day. And you're a smart guy, and this isn't my first rodeo.
Yeah.
So let's don't start talking about dirt roads in New York City or even in Miami. So if we're looking at this, here's the problem we've got: is it's either a fee to keep people from using the roads. Because if we're talking about changing behavior, all of you have an app on your phone that you already use that changes your behavior. Because you have GPS that has Waze or anything else, and it changes. I mean, I can drive out in Washington, D.C. today, and it will tell me which way to go and to the same location depending on traffic. So we don't need a financial model to do that unless it's going to say, well, Mark, you need to get up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock and change my behavior that way. So how do we do that? Because it is a tough sell in North Carolina to say raise taxes to help you in Miami or anywhere else, unless it's dealing with interstate commerce and our truckers. So how do we do it? I mean, because if not, this is all happy talk, guys.
I think you're limiting what interstate commerce is to interstate highways, and I don't think that that's actually true. I think interstate commerce, if you look at all type of, whether it be the rulings from the courts or just as a practical matter, interstate commerce exists not just on I-95, but when you get off on Northwest 8th Street. I don't think you can disconnect those things. And I think if you start to parse out your part of the system, then it kind of diffuses the idea that we are actually in this together. I by no means would ask you to ask your residents to raise taxes for us. What I would ask them to do is to understand that as go one part of this country, goes every part of this country. Look, when we're trying to bring in goods and services and our port is busy in Miami-Dade County, that's not just good for Miami-Dade County. That's not just good for Florida.
I agree, Mayor.
It's good for America.
Yeah, so I agree with that. But when you talk about a federal role for airports, seaports, and interstate, that is very different than a meter for congestion on commuter traffic in and around major metropolitan cities. It's very different. Now, I don't deny that there is commerce going on there, but what I'm telling you is that when you look at it, when you look at commuter congestion, we already have federal dollars that go disproportionately to major metropolitan areas for mass transit, don't we?
I don't know that it's
Yeah, 82% of our mass transit dollars goes to major metropolitan cities, none of which are in North Carolina or even Georgia. So when you look at that, when we're looking at that fair share, what I would ask each of you to do, and I'll yield back with this, I would ask each of you to do, is look at it from a standpoint of a rural area and state. What should be their appropriate contribution from a federal standpoint to help you deal with an issue that many view as a local issue, unless they happen to be traveling, to Miami or New York or Los Angeles or wherever it may be. Would you come back with recommendations for me, each one of you? 3 recommendations on how I can sell it in North Carolina, and I'll yield back.
Absolutely, Congressman.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Davids?
Thank you. And I'd like to start off by expressing appreciation to the chairwoman and to the ranking member for holding this hearing today. Also, I'd like to say that I appreciate that Chairwoman Norton for highlighting in her opening statement the tolling and congestion strategies that are inherently linked to issues of equity and that are oftentimes adversely affecting lower income communities and communities of color. Kansas has for a long time taken pride in our infrastructure, the roads, bridges, railways, ports that our state provide means that transportation of the food and a lot of goods that feed the world and are put out through the rest of the country and internationally come through our state. A number of the corridors in the Kansas 3rd Congressional District, which I represent, badly need investment to expand the number of lanes, to ease heavy congestion, to adopt new designs that require less expansion and implement modern safety measures. My constituents consistently tell me that they want to see smart, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure so we can build the foundation for economic growth for the future. I'm here on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee to make that happen. I'm also want to highlight that I did have the chance not too long ago to host Chairman DeFazio in our district to tour Highway 69, which is a major thoroughfare in our district, and we had the chance to talk about the infrastructure needs there. YRCW, which I highlighted earlier, is a really good example of a corporate and civic citizen in our district, and we need to make sure that we highlight the good work that you're doing, but also I want to talk about the massive swings that YRCW is all too familiar with. And when I say that, I mean, you know what it's like to go through a downturn and then come out of that a much stronger company. And so I just want to make sure that if you have a chance after when I'm asking the question, if you could speak to that. I'm particularly interested in your approach, though, for my question, your approach to tolling and congestion charges. And you touched on this in your remarks, but there's a common misconception that trucking companies don't want to pay their fair share, and you spoke to that and indicated it's not the case. And I'd like to hear you expand on how the existing and future tolling mechanisms and schemes that we've heard about affect a company like yours, whether that's the positive effects or the negative effects.
Thank you, Congresswoman Davids. And quickly, when I mentioned earlier, YRCW, we pay $25 million a year in tolls. At our company, we're a $5 billion company, so if you look at it from an operating standpoint, that's half of an operating point just in tolls that we're paying. Now, as far as transportation companies paying their fair share, trucks are about 4% of registered vehicles, 9% of miles traveled in the United States, but we pay around 42% of the federal highway user fees. So when I make a case for increasing the fuel tax, that certainly has both barrels pointed at the trucking industry, but we're well aware, just like in the state of Kansas, that 90% of everything that goes into Kansas from a goods use standpoint comes by truck. And we have to preserve this great heritage we have in the nation of adequate infrastructure that unfortunately has been underinvested in over a longer period of time. The best way I can make this point, And we've had a lot of conversation about individual cities, but when we talk about interstate commerce, when one state is forced to take action for whatever reason to put toll gantries on a federal interstate just because they happen to have a few miles of that interstate in their state, and then all users, including my company and many others, are taxed through a very small state that we do very little business in. Those type of situations endanger companies, and it endangers free enterprise because any state that has an interstate running through it could actually have one of these hostage centers where all line haul traffic is going. There's a company that's not here today that went out of business earlier this year, a unionized company based in New Jersey, and in the public statements they made around their closing, they mentioned the tolls in the northeast area of the country where they operate. So I think that's the ultimate example of what can happen if we don't take this seriously and also look at the Highway Trust Fund as an investment in our economy moving forward, and certainly in the free enterprise of the United States.
Thank you very much. Your time has expired. Next is Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank you, all of you experts, witnesses, and for your testimony. Mr. Scribner, thank you for being here today as well. This entire committee, myself included, is eager to address the issue of dwindling resources of our Highway Trust Fund. However, as we work to solve this issue, I want to be sure that we have parity in the contributions made to the fund across all users. And I have 2 points that I'd like to make here. Texas is the only donor state to the Federal Highway Trust Fund. We get 95% back, 95 cents back for every dollar that we put in, which costs Texans roughly $900 million a year. Every other state gets more than they put in, resulting in Texas basically subsidizing every other state in this union. Other states get from 101% to 685% back on their contributions. I'd like to introduce a letter, Madam Chair, which was submitted from our Texas delegation here in the House and Senate to the committees of jurisdiction. Thank you. But there was another point I'd also like to make. Any proposal considered on changes to the Highway Trust Fund contributions should also recognize that even though there are more and more high-efficiency electric vehicles on the road, these cars are still pounding the pavement as well, the same as gas-powered vehicles. So those are 2 points that I would like to ask you. Could you please share with us how you believe that we can ensure parity on our surface transportation system, not only for drivers on the road, but also state apportionment, and how all should contribute equitably, reliably, and sustainably?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yeah, the donor-donee state issue went away for a while since the bailouts began in 2008, but as you said, it's now back a little bit now that Texas is once again a net donor state. And I think that is, we can tweak the formula all we want, and there's been, battles over that in the past, but at the end of the day, we just have to recognize that the way the federal program works is you collect money and send it to DC just to send it back. That's primarily what it does, and it's also important to put it in context. 75% of our surface transportation spending is state and local, not federal. So the federal it plays a smaller role than the states and locals. And I think going forward, especially when we're looking at replacing the fuel tax with something viable for the long term, I think revisiting the broader federal role, I do think that there is a federal role in policing interstate commerce concerns. But in terms of spending and taxation, yeah, going forward, I think those are very reasonable questions to ask and potentially rethink on how we do things. And then in terms of the electric vehicles, as long as the fuel tax is the primary method of collecting revenue for road projects, that's how we're going to do it. I think there are better ways to address that than others. I think you should charge by use rather than slapping big fees on them. Yeah, we need to find a solution because eventually the internal combustion engine and the fuel tax will not be very valuable to this discussion.
Okay, and then a follow-up question about that. Texas adds about 1 million people every 3 years to our population. In your expert opinion, how can Congress focus federal investment on our surface transportation system that actually maximizes economic growth, not only in Texas, but everywhere else as well, and also promotes global competitiveness? If you would.
I mean, I think
short answer, please.
Pricing is really key. I mean, we have you can think of traffic congestion as bread lines in the Soviet Union. It's the same problem. It's a misallocation of resources because we're not doing the price signal. And what we end up doing is spending a lot of time to basically try to replicate the information we could get through pricing through bureaucratic and engineering means. So if we had pricing, we could know where to better invest going forward, and I think we'd just have a much more efficient system overall.
Okay, and I'm about out of time, and Mr. Lomax, you're a fellow Texan here, and really quick, all right, she's cutting me off, so I guess my time has expired. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for those questions. Ms. Davids. I'm sorry, Mr. Garcia. Ms. Davids has already spoken. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair Norton and Ranking Member Davis for putting this hearing together, and my appreciation to all of the expert panelists. I'd like to begin with some local context. In 2018, a study entitled Global Traffic Scorecard, Chicago was ranked as the third most impacted city in the country when it comes to traffic congestion. The previous year, by the same metric, we ranked 8th. So it's a significant bump up, and it's getting worse. Individual drivers in the Chicagoland area lose up to 138 hours per year in traffic. Nationally, the average is 97 hours lost per year for an average loss of $1,348. For someone making the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, working 40 hours a week, all 52 weeks of the year, that's almost 10% of the $15,000 annual income. There is a lot wrong with this picture, but the picture I'm trying to paint is, one, traffic congestion is costing our economy and our constituents significant sums of money. And two, congestion has severely disproportionate effects on working class families struggling to make ends meet. Many of my constituents suffer every day in Chicago congestion, and there are growing talks about introducing a congestion fee in our downtown area. While this had positive results throughout Europe, I caution diehard advocates to keep in mind the unintended consequences of flat fees on congestion. Flat fees without respect to vehicle type of travel and location can easily erect financial barriers for lower income individuals and their access to good jobs throughout the city. Right now, rideshare consumers of services like Uber and Lyft pay a 72-cent fee entering Chicago's downtown. We should look at that pricing. We should look at a congestion fee and various models, but it will take years of study, in my opinion, if we're to properly implement a fee, if any. We need to get it right. What I want to focus on is deeper and at the route of congestion, land use policy. That's why I'm working on legislation to promote more equitable, transit-oriented development, affordable housing, and more economic development around transit corridors so that those who need it most have the best access to transit options. I'd like to ask a question and direct it to Ms. Chang. The Texas Transportation Institute testimony mentions diversifying development patterns as a potential solution to congestion. Zoning, job location, and schools play a large role in where people live and the density of their neighborhood. Encouraging mixed-use and higher-density neighborhoods that naturally reduce the need for travel can improve congestion. Can you address the role of zoning and development in improving congestion? And what do you think that Congress should do to incentivize denser housing to help resolve the housing crisis without adding to congestion?
Congressman, thank you so much for your question and your leadership. In San Francisco, transportation and congestion are intricately tied to the land use question. And I think our Transit First policy for the last 40 years has recognized this, starting with our original downtown plan, which kept parking low, densities high, and invested heavily in BART and heavy rail muni BART systems. So that formula has been proven time and again. I think the federal role can really be to help fund the transit, fund the sustainable and complete streets, fund the infrastructure so that communities can be able to have a comprehensive approach to the land use and the transit-oriented development. That has to be a partnership, a state, local, federal partnership. We all do our role. It's a very important question, and I think one of the ways that we've been able to succeed is to, for example, even bring value capture into that conversation so that the federal investment in things like our Trans-Bay Transit Center really brings dividends back to the national investment sort of formula. We are definitely leveraging local funds. We're bringing greater development opportunities and growing sort of the economic pie and really showing the powerful synergy between the land use and the transportation, especially when the local federal partnership happen together.
Thank you very much.
I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. One of the things I want to point out as we get started with this, and we've talked a lot about the fact that the gas tax hasn't been raised since the 1990s. Congress was, at the same time we passed the last gas tax, we started passing these corporate auto fuel economy standards. And there's such things, the law of unintended consequences. As we passed the CAFE standards, raising the miles per gallon requirements for automobile manufacturers, we didn't take into account that as the fuel efficiency increased, fuel consumption would go down, and thus the revenues would go down. And so Congress is somewhat, I won't say somewhat, but very complicit in the problem that we're experiencing right now. We didn't take that into account. The other thing that I think we have to take into account, and there's a report from the Texas Transportation Institute, which I believe you're affiliated with, that points out the problem with delay cost. The report cites three projects: a small project, which was a rural road; a medium-sized project, US Highway 59; the large project, which was a interchange on I-10 and I-410 near San Antonio. It was in the San Antonio district. That the total of those delay costs was over $26 million. That's money that comes out of your transportation funding. That's not something that a construction company absorbs. And we're literally wasting billions of dollars in our transportation funding, paying delay costs because of activist lawsuits, blocking projects, and permitting issues. So that's another issue that I think we need to address. I want to speak to Mr. Hawkins about, you've said a couple of times that your company paid $25 billion in tolls. And that, I'm sure that's true. But that $25 million was passed on to the ultimate consumers of the products or goods and services that your trucks were transporting. So the burden of tolls, one way or the other, is going to get passed on to consumers. It's the same way with the gas tax. Whether the individual's paying it in their personal passenger vehicle or it's a trucking company paying it or anybody else, it gets passed on. It gets added to that burden. I want to talk about some solutions, and I'm sorry that Chairman DeFazio has left because he hit on a key point about how cyber and high tech can help reduce congestion. The University of Alabama has a cyber unit where they're able to monitor traffic flow and control traffic lights. If they see that, say, the east-west traffic is low, they're able to keep the north-south corridors open. We need to take advantage of the technology we have in the immediately and can immediately do some of these things to reduce congestion. And then another thing that we need to talk about is most of the discussion we've had here today has been in regard to urban congestion. And I was in Miami earlier this year, and I thought I'll never go back. It was unbelievable. There are other places that I literally try to avoid driving through. I'm from Birmingham, and we have some congestion, but nothing like Atlanta, Miami, and some other places I've been. But one of the things I think we need to talk about, Madam Chairman, is a paper that came out from the Obama administration. It's in the archives now, and it was titled "Rural Means Business," bringing, and the subtitle was "Bringing Tech Jobs to Rural America." With the technology we have today, and particularly with the opportunity to expand broadband, that needs to be part of our infrastructure discussion, expanding broadband to rural areas so that there's an opportunity for companies to locate out. Miami could be a hub for a much broader economic region. Atlanta could be, Birmingham could be, so that people don't have to live in close proximity to these urban areas. So I think we've had a lot of discussion here, but I think we really need to double down on coming up with some ideas to reduce traffic congestion and move more businesses and more people out away from these areas so you don't have that problem. With that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Palmer, the next Mr. Browder.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all of the witnesses for being here today. Mayor Gilbert and Mr. Brower, thank you for your comments and testimony as well. I'm from Orange County, California, and I'm really proud of the Orange County Transportation Authority and the job they are doing. And Ms. Chang, you as well, your comments are very similar to what we're trying to accomplish in Orange County. And I'm proud of them because right now, to the best of my knowledge, they're running the largest highway project in the country, about a $2 billion project to expand the 405 in one of the most congested areas in the country. And interestingly, I know one of the representatives here asked about the reason rural communities should care about what's going on in the cities. One of the things that's interesting to note, in the $2 billion project that we are doing in Orange County, there's only $46 million in federal funds. That's about 2.5% of the overall cost. Approximately half of it's being funded by the taxpayers of Orange County. So we are addressing those issues with a lot of locally raised tax dollars, but it would certainly be nice to have more support from the federal government in that respect. And one of the areas that is important is the TIFIA loans. And I'm just curious from Ms. Chang and Mr. Brower and perhaps Mayor Gilbert, I know they're important to you, but can you espouse a little bit more on what you would like to see from a process-oriented standpoint to make it occur faster, easier, less bureaucratic?
Congressman, we have not yet used the TIFIA program, and I emphasize the word yet because I do expect that we will be. We are looking at replacing the interstate bridge between Oregon and Washington. It's about a $3.5 billion project. We were achingly close to getting that project across the finish line a few years ago, and we're looking at a $1 billion TIFIA loan, which had incredible terms of very low interest rates, very low coverage rates, which mean you can leverage more dollars there. And so we see the TIFIA program as a likely source of great funding for projects going forward. And the federal government has been very helpful in working through those. It is a lengthy process, but the federal government has to do their due diligence. We would hope that over time they'd be able to expand the percentage of the project that program can cover and make sure that we can take advantage of those at the right timing.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Chang and Mayor Gilbert, I apologize. I'm going to shift a little bit just to try and cover a couple other areas. And Dr. Lomax, I really enjoyed the presentation you provided us and the background information. And I want to make sure, I understand this right. There's $166 billion in cost associated with lost time, and that's just gasoline and time and calculating that cost. And I believe you had mentioned also environmental costs, health costs, business losses not in that number. And I pulled from Google that the EPA says there's 5.5 pounds of CO2 per gallon. That's before it's combusted, and over 19 pounds when combustion occurs. So that's 63 billion pounds of CO2 per year going into the atmosphere with the fact we have this massive amount of congestion. Does that sound about right?
I'm not sure about the science behind combustion.
Well, trust me on the EPA.
Okay.
And I guess that's another reason to my friend from North Carolina as to why it would be good for us addressing this issue overall, correct?
Certainly there are a lot of other effects beyond what we measure.
A lot of reasons. And in fact, another reason is that of that $166 billion, it's fairly safe to assume that we're all paying for that $166 billion in increased cost of goods and services. Is that a safe statement?
I think my colleague with YRCW would confirm that too, yes.
Yeah, and I've had the privilege of touring the Port of Long Beach, and the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles account for 40% of all goods shipped in to the United States. And those goods are delivered to every single district in the United States. So when we talk about how important it is to have quality infrastructure even in the cities, because typically ports are associated with cities, the cost of transporting those goods has a direct impact on every community in the country, including rural communities. Is that a safe assumption? You would agree with that? And then the last thing I'll ask with my remaining time to Dr. Lomax is, again, I think your testimony and the data and information you've provided us is so important. You use Texas as a model that the do nothing versus do something. It's a 4x cost increase in not doing anything versus doing something. Is that a fairly consistent statistic across the United States?
The analyses that we've done show that it is, yes.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much for those questions. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Chairwoman Norton and Ranking Member Pence, and thank all of you all for being here today. Developing our highway infrastructure is essential for the continued development of my home state of West Virginia. While a major focus of today's hearing is on urban traffic congestion, I do believe that there are aspects that can be applied to roadway construction and repair across our country. Mr. Hawkins, tolling disproportionately affects the trucking industry that delivers the largest portion of our nation's goods. What is the most effective way that the federal government can fund highway construction and repair initiatives that is fair to both commuters and industry?
Congresswoman, I think that's an excellent question. It really gets to the heart of the matter of the way this discussion has taken place today, urban versus rural. And from the ATRIA standpoint, the American Transportation Research Institute, when we talk about technology and what it can tell us, that technology tells us that 87% of freight congestion on our national highway system is just in 17% of the system. So for example, California, where we've got a huge presence, we've got more terminals there than any other state, but we're a national carrier, so we're represented in every state. The ATA solution to that is that we take a portion of the Highway Trust Fund and dedicate it to this 17%. That's where the big trouble is in all of the public transit and in the areas where congestion is really hampering the overall economy. But for the other percentage of the system that we dedicated appropriately by showing all Americans that we're going to rebuild the infrastructure that really built this company. That when we put 45,000, when Dwight Eisenhower had the vision to push through 45,000 miles of interstate across our country, it opened up the whole country and it opened up commerce with it. And protecting that is how we do it. The Highway Trust Fund's not perfect, the fuel tax is not perfect, but for the immediate need that we all have, it is the solution we need to do today. And then also we can protect this infrastructure while we're figuring the rest out. But a portion of that fund does need to go to these urban areas that have these tremendous congestion problems. But overall, we can't ignore the rural areas that many of us are from and that our country depends on, especially from a manufacturing standpoint.
Thank you. Mr. Lomax, while a fuel tax is an obvious cost on commuters, what are the unseen prices of underfunding highway construction and repair?
I think certainly you see the vehicle maintenance go up when you have bad roads, but in addition to that, you see business inefficiencies. The YRCW trucks can carry less goods and services. When they can't go over load zone bridges, you see school buses having to route around county bridges that have load deficiencies. So there's a whole range of costs and effects on economic opportunity and quality of life.
What costs do rural commuters face compared to urban commuters?
Particularly for rural commuters who are going to bigger cities, going to the bigger economies, you see much longer travel distances. I think West Virginia has the longest average commute of any state because of the distances that many of your constituents travel. Certainly, the travel options are also not there. It's much harder to find bus service or train service from many of the rural communities into urban areas.
That is correct. Mr. Scrivener, how do the public, I'll start that again. Do the private-public partnerships for infrastructure projects tend to lower costs for commuters?
They can certainly lower costs for taxpayers by shifting that risk off of the public and onto private investors. They have a much stronger to get the job done right and cheaper than conventional procurement. So I think often it is the case that you see substantial savings to both the users, given what they're getting in terms of the quality of the asset that they've now paid for, as well as the taxpayers who are no longer shouldering the burden of the project.
Thank you so much. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlelady. Finally, Mr. Pence.
Thank you, Madam Chair Norton, and Ranking Member Davis for holding this committee meeting and the witnesses for being here today. Recently, the American Transportation Research Institute found that highway congestion is negatively impacting our economy by staggering numbers. According to the study, congestion on our nation's highways costs the trucking industry $74 billion, which has the same impact as if 425 truck drivers sat idle for an entire year. The Texas A&M Transportation Institute produced a study that shows in 2017, Americans lost a total of 8.8 billion hours of productivity due to congestion. Over 1.2 billion hours of lost productivity were attributed to the trucking industry alone. As the crossroads of America, my home state, Indiana, is home to 3 of the country's worst bottlenecks, with the 11th worst choke point at I-65 and I-80, which I'm sure many truckers know very well. Today, we have heard about the benefits of share riding technology, toll roads, HOV, or express lanes. Mr. Hawkins, as a fellow trucker for many, many years, and frankly all my life, I was particularly interested in your testimony. I wish this hearing and more of the industry would highlight, include, and consider the benefits of truck-only lanes or critical commerce corridors to physically separate cars and trucks in congested areas, or the 17% of the system, as you mentioned. CCCs utilize the existing interstate for truck lanes, which are constructed with increased pavement depths, reducing the amount of repairs that have to be done. Passenger traffic would be rewarded with new roadways in the right-of-way, which require thinner pavements and cost less to build. Truck traffic would benefit from dedicated lanes where predictability of shipments would be greatly enhanced with the potential for drafting and platooning, not to mention the safety separating the cars and the trucks. There is a growing interest in finding creative ways to pay for CCCs, including a diesel tax increase that would be dedicated to truck lanes. I am aware that truckers already pay more than any other entity using our highways. Mr. Hawkins, have you or the American Trucking Association considered utilizing CCCs? And if we were able to wall off these funds and dedicate them exclusively to CCCs, would the ATA consider supporting this option?
Congressman, and our distribution center in Indianapolis is one of our largest in the nation, and I agree, it's a critical point just from your home state. But overall, when we think about trucking and also its impact on Americans, I think it's important to protect that. Through the Highway Trust Fund and the recommendations we've made, I'm not an expert on all infrastructure in the United States or the appropriate way to fund that. The points I've tried to make, and me taking a day away from running the 5th largest trucking company in the United States to be here, was all about that, to just increase awareness, but also to make a plea that action needs to be imminent on these subjects to protect our overall economy across the United States. So to answer your question, certainly I'm a fan of any opportunity for us to make sure that 71% of our nation's goods and the delivery mechanisms for those goods are protected over a long period of time. And I think just what you've talked about would accommodate that. I do realize that we have to work across all aisles to make sure that what we do is not just good for truckers, that it's good for the environment and good for the country overall. But at the end of the day, I think solutions like that would help move us down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. Just a few seconds left. Anyone have a comment about that? No? Madam Chair, I yield my time.
Thank you very much for those questions. Mr. Smucker.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member. It's been a long hearing, but I think an excellent discussion about some of the needs in our highway transportation system, and I very much appreciate all of the testimony of everyone here today. Mayor Gilbert, I'm going to read from your testimony because I think perhaps this is the end of the hearing here, but I think it's just perhaps provide some perspective. You said roads are pathways to something greater. They are instruments of economic development and job creation. Then you go on further to say, I stand before you today in large part because someone invested in meaningful and efficient public transportation systems. And that's so true. I was a business owner myself for years in construction and saw the impact on the economy and on my business, the ability to grow the business after investment in infrastructure that provided additional ways to get around congested cities and so on, open up entire new markets for us. Do you think the public, do you think the people in your community, the people in your state understand the impact of government investment in infrastructure and understand what it would look like if those investments had not occurred in the past?
I think that they are being made to understand, and it's coming to their awareness now. One of the things that we've been talking about in South Florida is transit-oriented development and how different communities can look, and how we need to have good conversations with business owners, not just residents, about how mass transit is going to operate up and down those corridors. Look, we know that if done right, it's not just the money we spend, it's all the money we're going to get back and all the opportunities that we're going to create. And so I would be remiss if I didn't point that out, that we have an opportunity to, in a lot of ways, reshape South Florida, but reshape America with how we do transit. We can use it as a tool to do something more than just take us from point A to point Z.
Yes. Mr. Hawkins, I think all of you have mentioned the interstate system and the investment, but you just a few questions ago answered that and talked about the economic opportunity that has created. Do you think people take a minute to step back and think how things would look if that had not occurred?
I think from a transportation aspect, we're the largest employer in many states, and when you look at 29 of our states, transportation can be the leading employer in most cases. And because of that, people understand that over a long period of time, the infrastructure is what's allowed this country to thrive as we have, and that the underinvestment for many of us that I've been in this industry for 32 years, and because of that, I've watched what's happened, and my growing concern, and also the reason I'm here today, is just that I believe Americans do understand, and then overall, they understand the bottlenecks, they understand the congestion, and they're experiencing this on a daily basis, regardless of what else they're seeing on the news. They're living it. Even in rural areas, they're seeing bridges that have been affected by flooding and other areas over the last couple of years that is worse than we've seen in the last 20.
I can tell you, and I'm running out of time, but I can tell you in my district and in my state of Pennsylvania, people understand that investment in infrastructure is a core function of government, and it's important to our economic growth, and important to each one of them. And I know that because Pennsylvania was one of the states that implemented an increase in the gas tax. I was in the Pennsylvania State Senate at that time, advocated for that, helped to build the support for it. And it was done with the public support, who really understood the cost of congestion and the costs of impact on vehicle maintenance, as you had just described.
And we just did the National Truck Driving Championship in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago.
Yes. However, we haven't seen the public support yet for an additional federal investment. I don't have a lot of people calling my office yet, and I'm not sure why that is, but I can tell you two concerns that we heard in Pennsylvania that I think we can learn from. One is they want to ensure that if we're going to do additional investment for transportation, if there are going to be additional user fees, that it's used for that. It's very, very important. It can't be diverted to something else. It's got to be used for that. Secondly, it has to be used efficiently. And as a part of what we passed in Pennsylvania, we made some significant changes to the permitting process and to the way projects were delivered that resulted in cost savings. I think that has not yet been part of the conversation here. Very, very important. And then finally, and this point was raised by several other, Mr. Meadows and Mr. Babin, you have to know that it's going to affect, if the money's coming from our area, it's going to impact. I have to go back to people in my district. Every member here has to go back and say, this is a problem we have in the district that will be addressed. And I won't have time for you to answer this question, but I'm not sure that we've addressed that yet either. I think it's time we step up. It's time we get this done. Legislators need to hear from the public on this issue because it's an important issue. But I think we also have to address those very, very important questions about how we will spend that funding and how those dollars will be efficiently invested. And just one other point, and thank you, Madam Chair. A state like Pennsylvania that has made the commitment to invest in the infrastructure, we have a fairly high gas tax. There are a number of reasons for that, but the biggest reason is because we recognize the need to do that. I want to know as well that if there are dollars coming from Pennsylvania into the federal system, that Pennsylvania will receive credit for the investments they've already made and for what we've already asked for taxpayers from. So just some random thoughts. I wish we had a little more time to address some of those issues. But again, thank you for each of you for being here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, I thank you, Mrs. Smucker, for that very thoughtful line of questions. I was intrigued to hear that when you were in the, I think it is Pennsylvania legislature, you voted for an increase in the gas tax. I don't know what happens when they kick people upstairs, but I understand that in the state you're closer to the people. And I think it's informative, and I'd like to hear more from members what their own experience has been. You raised certain issues. I want to assure you that we will follow up on those issues you raised. So we're certainly open to ways to increase revenue besides the old-fashioned ways. We are concerned that the states are leading the federal government. When our bill will show that 80% of the funds are federal and there is a match of 20% from the states. So the ball really is in our court. It looks like members are from states that have valuable information to give to us as we try to figure out what to do. I indicated already that the Senate has passed a bill, sorry, that's incorrect, have a draft bill which increases revenue. They're not prepared yet to make that visible. They have a appropriator to work with, and they've got to make sure that happens. In our case, Ways and Means has had a hearing, and we've got to wait to see what they do about revenue. But I want to assure members that we are open to their suggestions and ideas as we try to figure out how to do a new bill, a 2020 bill that is nowhere like what our last bill was, which was no revenue increases at all. I want to thank members on the other side for working with us, because what we did, of course, as I indicated at the opening of this hearing, was to make a 6-year bill a 5-year bill, and so I was pleased to have them work with us to get some increased revenue. I don't think anybody wants to do that next time, and I think the witnesses today have helped us to understand the urgency and the differences that we have to take into account in coming forward with a new bill that in many ways it must look very different from the FAST Act. Very valuable testimony. Are there any further questions from the subcommittee? Seeing none, I want to thank again our witnesses for the many contributions you've made together today to our thinking. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to the questions that may be submitted to them in writing or have been submitted from the dais. And unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a good day. You too.